can start.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Last meeting online during the Disclavier Masterclass is with the famous Professor Solomon Minkowski from Manhattan School of Music. It's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you for all of our listeners and to have an interesting chat. I hope so. The title is The Teaching Legacy of Professor Minkowski. I hope you agree to tell us a little bit about your experience, about your methods, and hopefully about some of your pedagogical secrets.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, the Academy, and you, Madame Popova, and also Madame Pavlovska, and Adam Kosmieha, my former student, and all the people who are contributing to this for making it possible. It's a great honor for me to have a conversation with you because, first of all, I know who you are, and second, because I witnessed your masterclass on Chopin at Manhattan School of Music. So I can tell you right now that I am trembling with fear of talking to such a great artist.
Please don't be. I'm the same. But you are the main hero for this hour, which is before us, so in front of us. So we are really very interested in this conversation, and we would like you to tell us a little bit about your pedagogical experience. How many years are you teaching? I think it's quite a lot.
Well, I taught 7 years at the Juilliard School, and then I taught 52 years at Manhattan.
52 years.
So
This
that's
huge experience.
59 years. By next year, it will be 60.
Wow.
So therefore, there is a big difference between the way you look at me and my photo that you have in advertising this program.
No, it's not the change is not very big. Absolutely.
So I can tell you that I teach by intuition. I think that my goal is that every performance is the result of a combination of the style of the music, the contribution of the student, and my assessment as to how we can combine that in order to produce an interpretation that is sincere, personal. Maybe one of the deficiencies about my teaching is that I don't have definite ideas about how a piece should be played. I'm very open-minded, and I never know what the final result will be. But what I want is to be different from one student to the other. Now, I think that as I look back into my life, I think that one of the greatest assets that contributed to my sense of music was the fact that my parents were immigrants from Poland who traveled, yes, from Poland to Cuba in 1928. So I was born in an island, the capital, Havana, which was the main port in the continuous exchange of culture and industry and everything that was produced in Europe, between Europe and Latin America. So therefore, born in Cuba, I learned about the Spanish tradition. I had the Eastern European music surrounded me through my family and the weddings and the parties that I attended as a child, where I myself played on the piano with my own band It could be a waltz by Strauss, it could be a Cuban conga, it could be a Spanish piece. So I improvised, and then I had the opportunity to listen to the greatest flamenco dancing that one could imagine. My teacher in Cuba studied in Paris, so I used to play French music. For example, Poulenc, at a time when it was not even known in the United States, when I was very young. And most important, I had the influence of the rhythms of the African slaves who were brought to Cuba, and they contributed immensely to the flavor of Cuban music. So when I have to face the repertoire assignment to my students, also having studied at Juilliard with one of the greatest Russian pianist pupil of Joseph Levin, I feel I have a sense of the contributions that European culture, German culture, Russian culture, French culture, Spanish culture, Cuban, all this combination has made me able to accept and be open-minded. And I think that's the main reason for whatever results I am able to get with my students. And thank you so much for asking me this question.
Yes, being open-minded is particularly important nowadays when a lot of our students try also to play not only classical music, but also to get some sense of improvisation, jazz improvisation, and for very strong academic people, these students have a very tough life with them. But working with such an open-minded professor, actually, I have to say that among my students, I have had also several very good jazz players. And I'm also this sort of open-minded professor. And when you came to the United States, did you get at once to Manhattan School, or you had a little other adventures, so to say?
Well, I was very lucky. When I was already a student, first of all, before I entered Juilliard and during my years of Juilliard, the Cuban Revolution came about. And I had a scholarship from the Cuban government before the revolution and after the revolution. They made a study to make sure that it was not a political scholarship. So at that time, Cuba wanted to send me to Russia, to Moscow, to continue my studies. And it was in the middle of the Cold War, and I felt as a young man that I would never be able to see my parents again because of the great stress between the communism and capitalism. So I decided to stay in New York, especially because my teacher was a pupil of Joseph Levin, and I didn't see the need for me to move to any other country. I was getting the best so-called Russian school in New York. And as far as open-mindedness, I think that students need to have it both ways. They need sometimes a teacher who is strict, and they need sometimes a teacher who lets them be free. I think that being exposed to only one of the two attitudes can be dangerous. So I often encourage my students, when I feel they have learned enough from me, to go and study with other teachers that I feel will give them exactly the opposite point of view. And it's good for them.
Yes, this is a very good idea. To be open also when students are interested in other ways of teaching, and not to be jealous. Some of the teachers can be jealous, but this is a great profit for the students to get some ideas from different sources and to create their own personality on their own way, not to shape them in one way and one mode. Sometimes when people are asking me what is my method, I say I have no method. I have so many methods as I have students. This is really, I think, what makes the teacher being a real friend of these young people, that we are like, we have the same goal and we have the same dreams, and I'm only helping them. But we will be very happy to have some examples of the play of your students. I think we have something prepared here. Probably it's time to listen to some of your famous students.
Well, I hope they do well.
Who is this?
One second. by Ignacio Cervantes.
It's wonderful. It's so impressive. Every one of them is different, virtuoso, classical, Cuban, and the last one from Tel Aviv. I think this was transmission. Oh. Microphone.
We can't hear you, the microphone.
Sorry. Yeah, the last one was performing at the Rubinstein competition, where he was one of the winners, the Tchaikovsky. I want to point out that the boy who played the Cuban music, 19th century Cuban dances, is Russian. So for me, I get a lot of pleasure from seeing a non-Cuban playing Cuban music with a certain degree of flavor. It's not easy. It's not easy. And then the girl who I think you heard in a competition, she played there things that she didn't study with me. But this particular piece is by a Polish-American composer, Rzewski. And I'm very happy that by coincidence, she's performing a contemporary piece by someone who has your blood. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much.
It was very interesting for us, and especially this piece by Rzewski. And this is a composer quite unknown in Poland, and we have a great problem with proposing really contemporary music to our students. They really are not very keen to study this kind of music, and we try to change the situation. And Adam is organizing every 2 years contemporary piano music symposium. But do you have a method to encourage young people to study their own music? Actually, this is their music. Do your students play a lot of modern music?
Absolutely. They all have to. And I'm not saying a lot. Each one has to play something that they hate and then they love. It's always always.
Very good method. Well,
They don't want to. They don't want to. They don't want to. They only want sugar. But you know, when I have a Chinese student, I ask him, when you have your food, is it always sweet? Do you like spice? And then they said yes. So why not in music? Why does it always have to be sweet? You know, I have a method. When they come for the first lesson, I talk to them about a woman who is coming home at night, midnight, and there's a man in her bedroom with a knife who wants to kill her. So I start improvising very dissonant sounds softly and getting increasingly louder, bangy, bangy, while she's approaching the room and facing the danger. So suddenly I bang the chord and I tell the student the man with the knife flew out of the window. So no more danger. So then I asked the student, would you prefer that this movie that you just saw would have had the Mozart C major sonata as a background? You know, so when you have danger, do you prefer that music or do you prefer the music you just heard? They all agree. The music they heard is much better for this situation of the danger. So that's one of the ways that I convince them and I practice with them. The problem with contemporary music is that it offers tremendous rhythmic challenges. You know, when you play a Schubert sonata, you have all kinds of challenges, but the rhythm is same. Tara, 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 Beethoven, Haydn, etc. So suddenly the rhythm is broken here. Suddenly some notes are fast, some notes are slow. You have a big rest. So that's something very difficult. So what I do is that I close the piano lid and I start tapping with them. Just one or two measures. The question is not to let them go very far because they get all frustrated. They don't get anything done. They just hate it. But if you get two measures perfect and you get the rhythm, the notes, and you play it up to tempo, not slower, you cannot, then they begin to like it. And by the end of the year, they all have something substantial to play. And I will tell you, I don't know about Poland, but in New York today, unless you win the Tchaikovsky or the Liszt or first prize on the Rubinstein, you cannot have a debut recital that will be attended by the newspaper unless you play an interesting program that includes something contemporary. If you don't do that, you just pay for the hall, your family comes, they applaud you, your friends, but that's the end. No one remembers it. So it is my responsibility as a teacher in a major institution to prepare my students, not only if they want to make a debut, but also if they want to get a job in a college. Because if you apply for a job in a college and the dean of the school tells you, okay, can you play the quintet for piano and strings that my composer in my faculty composed? Yeah. How am I going to hire you for a teacher if you cannot play the music my composer wrote? I need somebody who can do it. So there are all kinds of reasons. And I also want to say that when you ask me about my method is trying to make my students to be teachers when they practice. Anything that I tell them, first of all, I don't give them answers. I very often try them to arrive at the answer through questions that I make. And finally, I might tell them the answer. But it's very important for students to understand that when I ask them to find a way to master a problem, that they should remember how we did it in order for them to do the same when they teach. Because most of our students are going to be teaching. And we are only teaching them how to play. We're not teaching them how to teach. And that is something that we're not facing our responsibility when we don't do that. I welcome your thoughts about what I said. Did you understand me?
Yes, of course, I understand you. And another thing is that actually when they are practicing, they have to be teachers for themselves.
Yes.
Listening to their, to know what was good and what was not good. I try sometimes also to get the answer asking different questions, but for sure I'm not doing this enough. I will try to apply this method more large. I think
please.
don't
change. What? Don't change anything. Don't change anything. Just stay the way you are.
You think so? I think everybody is changing all the time. Even after many years teaching, when I try to count how many years I'm teaching, it's quite similar like you. But nevertheless, I try to improve myself all the time. I'm a perfectionist. But I think Adam had some questions, no? Oh, where now we have no questions. But another thing is for me, how are you treating your students when they are preparing for a competition and then they came back from the competition with no success? What are you saying to them?
Well, I happen to be lucky that many of my students who won competitions, but I myself don't like.
We know this, but sometimes
I don't like the idea of competitions. And when I am a juror in a competition, I look for 2 minutes of ecstasy. If a student can play 2-3 minutes of something really that touches my heart or my mind, I'm satisfied. But when I have to give a first prize to someone who plays everything well but nothing great, that's happening very often, and that bothers me. So I can tell you, I have been many years ago a witness to the success of my students. And if you look at my face, very often they win first prize and I look like I am in a funeral. And sometimes they non-win, I am the happiest person in the world. I don't care about the prize. I care about how they play. And very often the jurors are wrong and they give the prize to my student when he doesn't deserve it, or doesn't give a prize to a student who does deserve it. So it's a question of how they play, not what they win. And I think you mentioned Adam. I want you to know how proud I am. Look at that. So Adam studied with me. From the beginning, he showed interest in contemporary music. I am thrilled with the progress that he made studying with you in Poland and other teachers. But he represents a beneficial element to Poland because he's a major teacher in a major institution and is playing contemporary music and is a good influence on the young students in this school.
Absolutely. He's very, very precious, valuable teacher in our, and he's doing a lot of work not only as a teacher but also organizing different things, and he's playing a lot and recording. So I'm really very happy that Adam is with us.
Of course.
But I asked you because I think that being teacher, music teacher, is a lot of psychological needed in this relationship with our students. This is so vulnerable topic. How you express yourself through music, and the relationships starts to be very close. Working on pieces, musical pieces, and sometimes I feel that I have the obligation to be with them, especially when they are not successful, and I'm confused what to say. That's why I asked you, because I think it's an important moment. Success is dangerous, but not anymore my task to deal with this. But failure is something what I want to help them. And nowadays students are so keen on these competitions. Of course, this is like a disease, you know, of our musical life, that everything is like comparing who is better, and it's so difficult to say who is better when you have two personalities completely different, but both are very good. But this happens on competitions, and
Okay.
they have to come back and to say, I'm not worth, and I have to ensure them that they are very much worth. But how to deal with them? It's difficult, really.
Okay, I
Frustration.
want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment on your statement. The problem with me and competitions is that it doesn't matter if you win competitions if you have no repertoire. I have seen plenty of competition winners who cannot have a career because they have no repertoire. Why don't they have repertoire? Because they go year after year reviewing the same piece trying to win.
Yeah.
And even if they win, it's not important. The important thing is to learn. That's why, for example, when Sofico entered that competition, I wish she would have not entered and waited and learned more new pieces instead of reviewing
Yes.
old pieces in order to try to win. So she didn't win, and she wasted a year reviewing pieces that she studied before. And this is the big problem with competitions. And it's the repertoire. So when you go to so many, you keep reviewing and reviewing and reviewing. And for me, the most important thing is to have a big repertoire to read very easily. The pleasure of sitting down and be able to open any score for the rest of your life and not have to struggle, be able to read it. But if you only play a few pieces in your life trying to win, you might win. Your parents would be happy. Your teacher would be
Absolutely
happy.
right. Yes.
But you don't have the power to enjoy music because every time you learn a piece, you have to struggle.
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. They win with pieces. They play them 5 and 8 and 10 years, and after they are helpless. But do we have another example of music? Can we turn on another film of your students? I
Thank
think
you very
we have
much.
prepared all.
Oh, look at that.
Again, so interesting. This Blumenfeld Etude. Such a wonderful piece and absolutely unknown here. Absolutely.
Yes, there is. I have an edition of Piano Works for the Left Hand, which was edited by a great American pianist, Raymond Lowenthal. And he was my colleague at Manhattan. And he assembled, not only is the collection great, but also the introductory literature that he brings on the subject of why so much music was written for the left hand. So many pianists lost the use of the right hand. But actually, last year I had the opportunity to have just the opposite experience. I had a student who lost the ability to play with the left hand for a year, but I had 12 etudes written by a Cuban composer dedicated to me for the right hand alone. And that's very difficult to write because it's very hard to get to the bass and to create harmony with the right hand. But this master composer wrote these wonderful etudes, and one of my students, the one who played the Tchaikovsky, is going to record 3 sets of etudes by Cuban composers, including these ones. I wanted to comment on the fact that when Adam performed, it showed what students cannot see when they look at contemporary music. They look at Haydn, they look at Scarlatti, and they have an idea how it's going to sound. They look at this concerto that he played, and they have no idea. But look at Adam. He had drama, he had charm, he had passion, he had every range of sound, every range of emotion.
Thank you.
So when you are able to find that in this music, why should you spend the effort to find out what the music has? It's not so obvious when you look at this strange writing, but when you hear it, all my students who don't want to play contemporary music, they hear something like that, and they say, I wish I could play this. So thank you for listening.
I had the impression that your Asian students, so impressive technically, are they apt to get the core of the Spanish and Cuban music? Because we see that Asian students are very, very good at Chopin playing, and they get better and better. And how is the thing with the Spanish music? Because Spanish music is also very specific, a little bit like Chopin is on his own way specific, but Spanish music. And what about the Asian student? How do they cope with this Spanish music?
Well, it's not a question just assigning one piece. I must tell you that when there was no COVID, I very often take all my students to a show of flamenco. They see the dancing, they see the tapping on the floor, they see the passion. And there's so much brainwashing. By the time they play a Spanish piece, they are immersed in it. It will never be the same like a Spanish pianist, unless they are very experienced and they do it for many years. I have some students who have played a lot of Spanish music because they have studied with me. One of them studied with me for 14 years. So she did over 14 years a bunch of Spanish pieces. So I think it cannot be done immediately. It takes a lot of time. And also, it's a question of advising students what to listen to, not before they learn a piece, but after they learn a piece.
Yes.
Okay, before they have no idea. And then when they finally know a piece and we have worked together, it's important that the Chinese students and Koreans know where is the source of authority. It's not a question of hearing the last recording by La Lang or Yuan Wang. They might play better than anybody, I don't care. But they must listen to French music played by Casadeciu, by all the pianists who came out of the school of Nadia Boulanger and the great teachers in Paris. If they play Spanish music, they must see recordings by La Rocha and many others that are not known. So I happen to know many pianists that are unknown to most Chinese, but I know them because of my culture. And that's what I was referring at the beginning, that I have the advantage. As far as Cuban music, I have it in my library. Many of it is not printed, not even printed. I wish I could do something about it, but my pupils have played Cuban music all over the world, and they love it. Yes.
Beautiful Spanish music. And we have here some questions, texts. What is the role? What is the role of musical analysis in preparing an interpretation of a piano piece.
Okay.
Have you read this?
I can see it, but I cannot write it. I don't know how to do it. Can I talk about?
To answer the question, what is the role of musical analysis in preparing the interpretation? What do you think? Is it so absolutely indispensable, or we can go without analyzing the piece?
That's that's a very difficult question to answer, and I think it depends on the students. I think that some students, I can give you a case. I had a little girl from Taiwan. She entered Manhattan School of Music. She won the competition immediately with the Greek concerto. She had such lyrical qualities. And then she eventually got a doctorate. And in the doctoral program, she analyzed a lot of music, and she knew a lot about how music was constructed. But unfortunately, she lost the ability to be creative. Her playing was not so engaging anymore.
You think because of the analysis?
I think the opposite is also true. I think that students are so surreal, so free, so unaware of the style, so far removed from the good taste that they must analyze and see relationships. Is very important. I think that some students, everybody needs it, but it has to be applied with a carefulness to make sure that the analysis contributes to not only the knowledge, but the eventually improvement of the performance. And the student does not get so obsessed with it that it actually destroys the natural instinct that sometimes is necessary. I think it's difficult to apply, but in general, I think the more you know, the better. I think you will agree with me on that. It's important to know. But how does it affect you playing? I don't know.
Yes, but on the bottom should be the instinct, I would say. This intuition, which must be like a foundation, and then every knowledge, of course, makes this intuition more and stronger. But without intuition is not possible. Only with knowledge is this music sounds a little bit empty. And another question is about your definition of piano technique in comparison to the teaching of Henry Neuhaus.
Well, I had the great opportunity to give a masterclass at the Moscow Conservatory. And I remember having the picture of Neuhaus right above me. And it made me I thought it was a great opportunity to demonstrate that through my studies with Goronitsky for 6-7 years, and who was a pupil of Joseph Levine, and my having listened to all the great pianists, especially the ones who came from the Neuhaus school, like Gilels and Richter, I think I am very familiar with the technical approach that is used in the Russian school. Above all, a beautiful tone.
Yeah.
And how to get that beautiful tone? How do you use your hands? What is the role of the wrist, the weight? I think it is the key to beauty. Whether you play Beethoven or Haydn or Bach, when you have an appoggiatura in Bach and you play the first note coming down, and then you come up on the second note and you have an accent, then you miss everything. Because I believe in the transfer of weight, of connecting a note to another by transferring the weight instead of hitting with the fingers. So the fingers are very important for clarity. And the secret for me of clarity is not how fast you play down, how fast you come up after you play. Because if you keep your finger down, there's going to be no clarity no matter how fast you play.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of clarity in texture the use of pedal only when you need it. I think that students start learning a piece with the pedal. They play it slower at the beginning than it should be, and then they get used to surrounding everything with pedal. And I really don't like it. I ask my students never to play with the pedal unless they play up to tempo. Now, for example, if I tell a student, learn this etude, and then the student says to me next week, I learned the whole etude, but I can play it slowly. I say to the student, I don't want you to play the whole etude slowly. I want you to play half a page fast, because otherwise you get used to pedaling and you're not making music. I prefer that a student enjoys everything in the music on day one. Within 1 hour of practicing, you can play something in a Chopin etude that shows what the music is about, instead of waiting 3 weeks until you can play fast the whole thing. I wonder what you think about that.
I must agree with you. I remember about Neuhaus, somebody told me this story. He was asked on what is depending the quality of the tone. And the response was on the articulation, of course. And then, oh, no, I'm not right. On the soul. And this was such a like discovering that the most important thing is actually what kind of person you are, putting through your fingers into the sound, your person. Probably this was his idea. But pedaling, it's something what makes the things not only unclear, but also the student is not aware that he is not listening actively to the legato, to the how one sound is transformed into another, because this so got mechanically with the pedal, and it's not like his own activity. This with finger everything getting together. But these are very, very specific questions. Probably it's better to discuss close to the piano. Here is a very interesting question, fantastic statement, also like compliments about us. But are there pieces that are vital for every pianist on some level in his life that one should definitely do sooner or later? What do you think about this obligatory program?
All right. I think that all the students want to play the major works of every composer. So we always hear the same pieces, the Appassionata, the Liszt Sonata, the Dante Sonata, etc., etc., etc. And I feel that if I am teaching somebody like, let's say, Kirill Gershwin, who has a major international career, he can play whatever he wants and he will be competitive. He will not be, he will not give the impression, why are you playing this piece when I heard Kissing play it and he plays it so much better than you? I believe that in order to have a place in a professional standing, a student who is not going to be the most important pianist in the world must learn to play pieces that no one else plays, that are good. Schumann wrote so many pieces. Why does he have to be the Carnival? Chopin wrote so many pieces. Why does he have to be the second sonata or the third sonata? And what about Fauré? What about Poulenc? What about Soler, the pupil of Scarlatti? What about Weber? What about Clementi? What about so many composers that no one wants to play or no one plays, that should be played, especially for those who need to do that in order not to play a concert and have, except his parents and his teacher, everybody says, okay, I paid to come to this concert, but I heard this ballad played much better 10 times. Why do I have to hear this student trying to do it? So I think there has to be a balance between what pieces are important and what pieces you must study in order to find a place in the professional career.
Yes, you're right. But for example, I think that the sonatas by Soler, for example, are very difficult to understand. They are much more complex than the sonata by Scarlatti. I have music of several sonatas by Soler, and I tried to do this with some of my students, and I have to say that it wasn't a really success because I couldn't help him. This music is very specific and very complex. So
Yes, I will
probably,
tell you. Yeah. I think that the best solution to teaching Soler is by starting with sonatas that Alicia de la Rocha recorded.
yes, I
Because, you
didn't
know,
have this recording.
okay, well, oh, that's crucial. Because the problem with Soler sonatas, you have to embellish them. If you play only what Soler wrote, it's horrible. You must embellish them. And one does not know how to embellish them because you have to be a specialist. You have to be born in Spain and study and be musicologist in Spanish music. But if a student learns 2 or 3 sonatas chosen from the recording that Alicia did, then that gives you the key. And then you can embark on learning a sonata that she did not record. And of course, the edition of the Soler sonatas complete was by a musicologist called Rubio. And he does not write anything. He only writes the text. In the case of Scarlatti, you have Longo, who at least added some suggestions, some figuring.
I know.
It makes it easier. Longo made it easier. But Soler, you don't have this opportunity.
Professor, we have another set of pieces of music, and we would like to turn on this third movie and this set.
Oh my God. That's when I was a child. I was 12 years old. Oh,
Professor, it's absolutely true that you love Cuba and you make your students play a lot of Cuban music. And here is a question. What qualities and problems are they facing playing this music? Why do you think assigning Spanish music to students so important? And what problems are they facing? What is your answer to this question?
Well, the decision on what to play has to do with the quality of music. The reason that Spanish music is not played in other countries so much is because it's very difficult and it's unknown. Somehow the great composers like Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Chopin became international composers that everybody was able to understand to a certain degree and have access to. So the fact that it's so valuable and so well written, and it's my reason for teaching it, and you don't have to do it. I never found a student who refused to do it. As soon as they join my class and they hear other students playing Spanish music, they want to have a Spanish piece, and it's quite an experience for them. So what challenges they have? Having to learn a style that they don't know. It's always mastering something like that is a very, very... So for example, the girl who played the Gershwin, that's a jazz American piece. She's from Belarus. She's not American. So she has the flavor for Gershwin. And the Cuban boy who played the Carter piece, he's Cuban and played this very continuous etude by Carter. So everyone happens to be from a different culture than the one of the music they play. For me, that's very important. I do not admire so much a Russian pianist playing Russian music. I admire a Russian pianist playing French music and a French pianist playing Russian music. That is difficult, and that's why I give credit to.
This is your contribution to the global peace, I think.
I don't know if it's global.
Yes, I agree. Of course, musicians should be like they are citizens of country called music, and not like Russia, Spain, and so on. It's another country, spiritual country called music. And this is what makes us so, in spite of the different languages we are using, that we feel quite close one to another. Music makes us feel really close. We have, for the end of our meeting here, something very special. I would like to see your face when you see this film. And this will be probably our last entering the.
Yes, I wanted just to mention to the person who asked the question before that in this group of recordings, I think that Alan featured the music that Polish students do not know so well. Of course, I have students who played Beethoven sonatas, Mozart, and everything. But he particularly, I think, had the intent of showing pieces that my pupils play that he wants the Spanish students, the Polish students, to get to know. Thank you. All right.
Wonderful pandemic composition. Professor, we have another question here. One of the last, probably.
Microphone.
Microphone. Can you put on the microphone? Okay. Please tell me from your experience, is it easier to teach a very talented person being aware of the great responsibility or the less gifted one? You have had so many wonderful gifted people. For sure, your answer is very reliable.
Well, I think that they're both challenges in different ways. It's much more difficult to teach a talented student.
Yeah.
Because the artistry, dealing with great high art, is so subtle, it's so unique. When you have to teach a less talented student, I get a lot of pleasure as long as there is progress. I don't mind doing basic work. I don't mind giving the most solid foundation that I can think of, because I did that when I had to survive as a student. I had to teach students for 30 minutes. I had to go from house to house. I had to teach anybody. So I did it. I don't come from a big concert career into teaching. I come from teaching into teaching. And therefore, they are both challenges. But unfortunately, there are more students who are not so talented than the ones who are talented or very talented. So therefore, it's a unique privilege to teach a student who can really make you feel like you are touching heaven. I don't know if I answered the question that the student wanted to ask me.
Yes, you answered. I would agree that it's very difficult to teach these very talented people because you're afraid not to spoil something what is in their talent, and by too much pressure or too much interfering with their interpretation. I agree with you absolutely. I see that this hour and half an hour you became acquainted for our Bitghost audience, and probably not only from Bitghost. And I'm very happy that at least on this way we could meet. The plan were absolutely, our plans were otherwise, but what happened happened, and we have to do this way our meetings. I remember a year ago, even more, we spoke about you're coming here to Poland in the autumn, but it came out that it's absolutely impossible. But I hope you're in good health now. How do you feel?
I am stable. I'm doing my work. I have energy. I'm excited about teaching. I think my brain is working well.
Oh, this is the most important.
Quickly.
This is the most important thing.
Yes.
So probably it will be given us to meet once again in person. I hope so.
Absolutely. I want to talk more with you. I want to learn. You know, the older I get, the more I realize how little I know and how much more I like to know. And having the opportunity
like this
to have an intimate conversation with you would be always welcome. but I saw you teach. I know your values, and I know what you stand for. And you are a great example to all piano teachers in the world.
Thank you
And
so
I commend
much.
you for that.
Thank you so much. Such appreciation from such a person like you. It's really something unique. Thank you very much. And
Good.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Here.
Thank you to everyone. And my greetings to Professor Pobrokska.
Thank you. I will send you greetings and
All
take
right.
care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.